Welcome to Week Old Beans episode. Why do I never check the episodes before we do them, Fowler?
You just don't have that you don't have that preparation, you know?
Probably. This is episode number 35. Episode number 35, and boy, oh boy, do we have news for you. Fowler, why don't you tell the people what's going on? Because it's a hefty bit.
The Russian opposition leader Navalny died under very suspicious circumstances. Navalny I think he was 46. He was very young.
41.
And he didn't have a 41, and he did not have a history of health problems. And you might be saying, because we've talked about a little bit before, like the tendency of high-ranking Russians who oppose Putin to die. But Navalny was a really special figure in Russia because he was the undisputed leader of the opposition to Putin's government. Navalny was like very charismatic. He tried to be the mayor of, I think, Berlin. And, he was responsible for organizing a lot of mass protests and kind of building a mass movement. And, he was very much like Putin's arch nemesis. He was the primary, when the Kremlin went to sleep at night, the person within Russia they were most worried about was Navalny. And, pretty much everyone thinks that Putin killed Navalny. He died under very suspicious circumstances. And we know that Navalny, there were many assassination attempts on Navalny before this time period.
Yes, Navalny was when he died. Just to give you some backstory, he had been arrested. He was in prison when he died.
For fake charges, like the Russians, the Putin and the Russian government made up charges to essentially imprison Navalny, so he would not be able to continue growing his mass movement.
Yeah. So with that backstory in mind, or with that knowledge in the back of everybody's minds, we got a lot to talk about. There's a lot of things that are happening. A lot of things that are happening. So Fowler, I think, has the more compelling take, and has more compelling interest. Or compelling opinions, I'm sorry, on this topic. So I'm going to let him take the lead. So let's talk about Navalny, right? Let's talk about who he is, what he believed in, and why he was such a formidable foe against Putin, and what his death means in the broader context.
Yeah, so Navalny was to the left of the Russian government, but I mean the Russian government is an authoritarian, totalitarian state. So it's not, I think it's important when we talk about Navalny to recognize, like, Navalny was not by any means a progressive. He was a hardline right winger. He was, would you say a pan nationalist essentially, Ardot? He basically believed in like the Eastern Europeans and the Russians all being one people that needed to work together in one single great nation. And
I wouldn't say that he, for example, I don't think he would have like invaded Ukraine. I think he would have been more tactical with his allyship, and he very much was somebody who believed in the idea of sort of this pan-Slavic, pan-Eastern European alliance. Yeah. But he was nowhere near as, I guess, imperialistically minded as Putin, and I definitely don't think he would have. I mean, I think he spoke out against the Ukraine war when it first started and said that it was, that it was atrocious. But in terms of the broader ideological belief, he was, he was
a hardline nationalist. He was very much. If he was, I mean, maybe not in America today because the American right are fascistic, but I mean, I think he was very much like a Ronald Reagan, hardline national kind of right winger in a lot of his policy. But I mean, the thing that made Navalny kind of important was that Navalny rejected, he rejected authoritarianism and he rejected the party, and he he was against a lot of the corruption and double dealing, and of course the violence and murder that Putin's government has used to maintain power over the country, in spite of the fact that like they are not very democratically popular and there is no real there is no way to challenge the party if you're not inside the party.
Yeah. So with all that being said, um, let's talk about his let's talk about his death. What that means. Um, what is the broader geopolitical context? I think this is I think it comes at a very interesting time because I alluded to it in the last episode, but Tucker Carlson, Fox News's former darling, was Tucker Carlson.
Maybe we save that for the end.
Well, I wanted to bring it up, but not so much to get into Tucker Carlson, but to sort of exemplify why this happening now is such an I guess such an interesting thing. It's because Tucker Carlson, going over to Russia, trying to do his what is it? I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's a Putin rehabilitation tour, trying to make Russia seem reasonable and seem up to standards with the United States. But this could not have come at the worst time for him because Navalny's death has been widely condemned by pretty much everybody, even people on the right. Even people who, beforehand had been towing the line with at the very least maybe not supporting Russia's actions, but wanting to pull support from Ukraine and being critical of Ukraine. So this is a his death happening now is certainly interesting. And has
Well,
wider, I think,
Navalny was
geopolitical
very
consequences.
popular outside of Russia. I mean, I don't think Navalny ever was interested in like an international thing. He's very focused on Russian politics, but Navalny had a lot of connections to Western European democracies and, of course, America. He was
47.
not
I'm
just
sorry. I said he was 41. He was 47.
yeah. I mean, I'm not, I don't find it surprising how many people have spoken out in support of him because Navalny he was also really an important international symbol of democracy in Eastern Europe.
Yeah,
But Tucker Carlson, while being one of the more egregious people, the far right, I mean, Ronald Reagan, I mean, he was a monster in many ways, but he did believe in like protecting other Western democracies if they were white and in Europe. And he did oppose like the authoritarianism of the Soviet Union. And that just isn't the position of the Republican Party anymore. I mean, the Republicans, Donald Trump has equivocated the way Putin kills his political opponents and journalists and things like that, as like also Americans kill people. Donald Trump has praised not just Putin, but Xi and Orban and all these vicious authoritarian figures who destroyed democracy in their countries. And, he's not the only one. There are many figures in right wing media, particularly in Fox News, and there are many high level members of the Republican Party who have who have glorified authoritarian strongmen in Europe and have equivocated or toned down the brutality that every strongman must do in order to maintain their grip on the country that they control.
Yeah. So sorry, I'm just reading up more on what's happened. But I mean, this is still an ongoing, developing story. I think they announced his death either Friday or Saturday. So I'm sure more information will come out. Obviously, he was being held at in an Arctic prison, essentially a gulag. And so Russian state media and the Russian government announced his death. Of course, any information we get from them, um,
We
I
need
would
to take with an enormous grain of salt
enormous
because
grain of
the Russian state controls their media and they lie constantly.
um, so he had complained about malnourishment and malnourishment and mistreatment while in prison. I mean, I don't necessarily know if he the kill order was given in prison, but for all intents and purposes, um, dying in prison is tantamount to mistreatment. Uh, if you're in prison and you're being fed well, treated well, um, you shouldn't die out of the blue, in my opinion. Um, so at the very least, murder by neglect. It could possibly be the cause of his death, but we don't know. And like I said, we won't know until independent investigations are done, and people with good conscience can relay accurate information to the United States about what actually happened.
It's very possible we'll never know fully because this sort of stuff happens in Russia all the time. People die under very mysterious circumstances, and there's no real internal investigation, and the Russians don't allow international parties to investigate. And so, it's very possible Navalny will be, it'll always be up in the air. But I mean, being that young, being in opposition of the government, being perceived by the Kremlin as being the biggest threat to their government, and then you dying suddenly, I mean, what are the odds?
Yes, and for reference, about 400 people have been arrested so far at protests and demonstrations, uh,
Yeah, it's been
in support of him.
surprising how there's been mass protests in Russia, like hundreds of thousands of people have protested, and there's been a lot of protests in the United States too, even among Republicans of his death. And I think this is very interesting. Ardon and I both have an interest in the media, and Navalny was an important figure, and I understand logically why his death has been such a big deal and why now so many people are going back to being pro Ukraine and anti Russian. But guys, one of the things you really have to think about, this is not a surprise. Vladimir Putin is a fucking monster. He's an authoritarian dictator, and he famously kills everyone who opposes him. He murders journalists, he murders soldiers, he murders oligarchs, he murders businessmen, he murders members of his own political party, he kills protesters. He sits on a throne of literally thousands and thousands of people that he has had killed. And he is also responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths due to the Ukraine war, which he instigated, and which he has continued, and he has allowed war crimes, and ethnic cleansings, and assassinations of children and women and unarmed surrendering soldiers. I mean, he's a fucking monster, and I think this is like I'm glad that people are taking him seriously now and condemning the Republican Party for, supporting and standing these vicious strongmen. But also, I mean, come on, guys. Like what the fuck is happening? How did the American public allow pro Putin propaganda to be allowed to be disseminated publicly by people showing their names and faces, and they were taken seriously and given legitimacy and supported by people? You know?
Well, I think that's a whole other conversation. I mean, I think I think the Republican Party is, over the past probably 3 years, shown its ass. Over the past year, they've most definitely shown their ass with their support of Donald Trump. I think if Donald Trump was critical of Putin, the Republican Party would fall in line. But I think a vast majority of the support for Russia um, has come because of the Overton window that Donald Trump has caused. To has with the Overton window within the Republican Party that Donald Trump has shifted. I think in a world where if Trump were critical of Putin, like actually critical and actually willing to stand up to him, then the Republican Party would just keep its original position of viewing Russia and Putin as the enemy. And I think some moderate Republicans still do. I mean, I think Nikki Haley has been critical of Putin. I think Mitt Romney has been. I think
It's mainly never Trumpers
yeah, but
though.
it's
The
mainly never.
people Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've talked about on this podcast many times that needs to be repeated is a lot of people are still very confused about the Republican Party and why they do the things they do. And that's because they perceive the Republicans as being conservative liberals, which is historically what the Republican Party has been. It was under Reagan, it was under Nixon. And, Ardot and I are not neoliberal conservatives. We're not for that ideology. We think that ideology has been bad. I would argue that that ideology has led to the current situation. But, we have to remember Donald Trump and those who follow him are not neoliberal conservatives. They're fascists. And a lot of people that you see who are confused by Trump, it is because they do not understand that distinction. They do not understand what Trump really is. Trump's isolationism, his focus on just being, America focused, and his allying with strongmen authoritarian, it doesn't make a lot of sense if you're a neoliberal conservative and you believe in the project of American empire. It makes complete sense if you're a fascist, because you're not really interested in maintaining, the globalization and the liberal democracy international project. Like those are liberal goals, and Donald Trump is not a liberal.
Yeah. So it's no surprise why the current Republican Party, which is the party of Donald Trump, like I think it's also important to make the distinction between the Republican Party and what is Trumpism, which the Republican Party has ceded itself to Donald Trump and his ideology. Um, so the mainstream Republican Party, like Fowler just said, is not the Republican Party of Reagan or of um, or of Bush even. It's the party of Trumpism. Um, and so yeah, I mean, so do you want to shift the conversation maybe to talk about Vladimir Putin? Because I know you have some thoughts about him, and maybe we can talk about who he is and what he represents.
Let's do that. But I think one more thing we should talk about is like why we're both pro Ukraine, because I think that's a tendency that's very troubling in modern America. Is both on the left and the right, a lot of people are isolationists. A lot of people don't want to fuck with the rest of the world. A lot of people are, very disinterested. And I want to talk about why that's like a bad thing.
Yeah,
I think understandable. I mean, if you're Ardot and my generation, or you're even a little older, I mean, what are the big American international projects? Fucking Vietnam, Iraq, like these massive failures where we were fighting for reasons that didn't benefit the American people. Um, you know, hundreds of thousands of people were killed. And I think it's made a lot of Americans not just cynical of why we do international things, not for the good of the country, but to benefit people like Halliburton, who made billions of dollars off of oil profits when we invaded Iraq. But I think I think a lot of Americans are cynical of our ability to affect the world outside of our own country. I think a lot of liberals, they don't believe in like the Wilsonian project of like internationalism, where all these different democratic republics can work together to make the world a better place. I think people just are afraid of that. And, I think that's a really misguided way of looking at the world. Like there are so many problems like global warming that cannot be fixed by us alone. We do need those other countries. And the other thing is, I mean, there are a lot of authoritarians countries in America. Putin is not the only one, or not in America, in the world. Putin is not the only one. And I think it's very important for fellow democracies to support each other. We not only are they our trading partners, but like, democracy has liberated tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of human beings across the planet, and has raised quality of life. It is allowed for all sorts of art and innovation and culture. And I think maintaining those democracies and maintaining our connections to each other is really important if we want to keep the world being a good place. And
Matt, can I cut in? Or I'll let you finish.
yeah, no, you go.
I was going to add, and I think, some historical context needs to be brought in because if y'all remember, and this is true of any authoritarian, fascistic regime, appeasement doesn't work. I mean, I think the lesson of World War II was not just, I mean, there were a lot of lessons in World War II, but I think the lesson that Europe learned and that the world learned in World War II was that appeasing an authoritarian, um, appeasing an authoritarian regime, a fascistic regime, through, it doesn't work. It just doesn't. And so I think there is an understanding from the powers that be that if Ukraine falls, if Ukraine is conquered by Russia, they will go for Poland next, and then after Poland they will go for Germany, and then after Germany they will go for whatever country borders them. I mean, it's I think there is an understanding that Ukraine is the buffer, and that Putin will simply just he's not going to take Ukraine and then stop. I mean, he's stated before that he has stated his intentions uh, on camera and on paper that he wishes to rebuild the Soviet Union. And
But not even the Soviet Union. He said that Russia's natural boundaries are, I think he said, Peter the Great's. And what people have to remember is Peter the Great's empire went to, I think, France. Like, Putin's goals are not just affecting the farthest, poorest Eastern European countries, And if you look at media coverage of Putin, I don't, or do you think I should point out specific people who have made this mistake, or
yeah,
do you think
point him out, fucking say it.
yeah, like um Hassan Piker has been famously wrong about this stuff. And there have been a couple of them, especially on the left, of like, oh, he's not going to take Crimea. Okay, well, he took Crimea, but he's not going to go farther. He's not going to take Ukraine because they're too big and like they're too close to NATO. Oh, he is taking Ukraine. Well, he only wants Eastern Ukraine. He doesn't want the entire fucking country. And if you look back at like the rise of Hitler or any of these like monstrous expansionists, you will find that history existed too. They were, the French and the English were convinced Hitler was not going to affect them, and they didn't have to give a fuck about the rest of Europe because it didn't matter to them if one or two countries were picked off, until he was literally in their back door and it was too late for all of them.
Yeah,
And,
so
and
it's
we will not be safer if we allow Europe or South America to fall to fascism. Our economy cannot survive us not having trading partners. But on the other hand, do you really trust that they're just going to be satisfied to just take over those continents? Why would they ever stop? Why when have men like that ever stopped at anything?
yeah, it's yeah, no, and Fowler is absolutely right. I mean, that would be my biggest thing is like, I don't think, because I hear it from people all the time. Well, America can't fight other people's battles. Well, it's I hate to say it, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but like America is the number one superpower in the world. I mean, if you lived in a place like maybe, I don't know, South Africa, or maybe in fucking Zimbabwe, like yeah, like if you're a Zimbabwean, it would be fair to say like, yeah, Zimbabwe probably can't fucking it's not Zimbabwe's responsibility, but America is the world superpower, and we are the most powerful military and the strongest economy um, that the world has ever seen. So it kind of comes with the territory of being an imperialistic, expansionist. I mean, America is an empire. It's never been a nation state. It's an empire. It kind of comes with the responsibility of being number one. As a wise man once said, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that holds true with geopolitics as an American. So, unless you're willing to cripple the U.S. economy and make us, I don't know, number 700, you're gonna have to fucking live with the fact that we have to get involved in international affairs. This is not the 1700s. This is not the 13 colonies. We're not vying for power with England and France and trying to cement our place in the world. We did that 50 years ago, and now we have a responsibility to ensure that other countries get to live democratically and free and unafraid of their tyrannical, psychotic neighbors who have nuclear weapons, by the way.
Hmm.
Again, this is not more than this is more than just about Ukraine. This is also about our nuclear rival, and a conflict that we started, you know, after the war ended. And Navalny was, the importance of Navalny was he was kind of one of the only ways we could end that conflict. And he is now dead.
Yeah, I don't really know what's going to happen to the opposition. I mean, it's good that there are mass protests and all that, but um, Navalny across our lifetime has really been the only opposition leader in Russia who was nationally important and a real threat to the Kremlin. I don't think it's been a very long time since someone like that has really had power, and I don't really know what's going to happen next. I don't know if there are lieutenants or acolytes of Navalny who can keep going. I don't know if the Russians are going to have to wait until a new Navalny is formed, but it is a terrible loss.
Until Putin dies and somebody, one of his generals manages to swoop in and secure power and is hopefully, fingers crossed, less psychotic than he is. Um,
Yeah, but you don't become an upper level member of the party in Russia if you're
yeah, like if you're milk toast,
not. Yeah.
that's the issue. Because I mean, I think the invasion of Ukraine is a perfect example of how Putin is surrounded by yes men. I mean, any normal human being with half a brain, the minute Putin said we should invade Ukraine, would have been like, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" But clearly he didn't get that response when he proposed the idea to his people. Uh, and if he did get that response, I'm sure they were swiftly taken care of. Because the war has
Yeah.
devastated Russia's economy. I mean, it's devastated um, like the oligarch of Russia. They've been sanctioned out the ass. I'm sure Putin is not well liked by a vast majority of the Russian oligarchy, but they can't really do anything about it because if they try to, they'll have a heart attack while they're eating cereal in the morning.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter if you're liked if you're in an authoritarian regime where you're willing to literally just gun down protesters. I mean, I think that's the thing that matters when we talk about Putin is Putin's depravity and his viciousness is not it's not a liability for him. It's why he's in control. And Putin got to power by killing literally everyone who got in his way. You're a fool if you think that Putin is not going to use the tactic that Putin has used his entire life to gain and maintain his power. You know what I mean? Putin is not going to listen to the protesters. He's not going to do reforms. It's not what Putin is. That's never what Putin's been. Putin is just going to literally kill and arrest every single person who speaks out in Russia. And that is who the Republican Party and Tucker Carlson are supporting and standing. And, you know, I think that's because they are for a strongman. They,
Well, they think
if
that
you
that's the
listen
tactic.
to,
That's what they want to do in the United States. They admire that. I said it. Fowler and I were. I'll relay our text conversation that we had the other day, but Fowler was asking me. He was stating that he didn't understand why Donald Trump had such a boner for Putin and Xi Jinping and Kim Jong, the leader of North Korea. And I posited it's that Trump is envious of those men. He wants to be those men. It's like a fanboy meeting his favorite celebrity or meeting his favorite athlete. I mean, Trump likes those men because Trump wants to be like those men. He admires Putin for his brutality, for his viciousness, for the fact that Putin is willing to disregard democracy, disregard um, public opinion, disregard the media, or at least control the media. Disregard international law, disregard the rights of not only the citizens of Russia itself, but the citizens of his neighboring countries. That's what Trump admires and who Trump wants to be as a leader.
and if you think that Ardot is being exaggerating, like, what do you think Hitler and Putin and all of these figures, how do you think they initially took power? You don't start by killing people immediately. You weaponize the Department of Justice against your political enemies, a thing that Trump said he will do if he becomes president. You go after the press so people don't know the crimes you're committing, a thing that Donald Trump has done his entire political career. You delegitimize elections and other democratic processes because you don't want anyone to be able to democratically challenge you, which is exactly what authoritarians have done, and it is exactly what Donald Trump has done. You know, Donald Trump, in both words and actions, has proved that he is an authoritarian. And um, if you think after he was willing to call into question the election, back Abbott's like Civil War secessionist rhetoric on the border, you know, uh, threatened to sue and imprison journalists for writing about him, saying that he would be a dictator on day one. If you really think a man who did all of those things in the public eye, you know,
It's just gonna
and
stop doing
admitted to
that when he
doing those
becomes president.
things,
you know.
yeah, do you really think a person who wants that power that much, if a Navalny came into American, if an American Navalny came and was a real threat to his government in the South or the Midwest, you know, you really think that Donald Trump wouldn't have him killed if he had consolidated enough power? You think he would walk away from that kind of power because he respects the rule of law and the Constitution? The Constitution that he has publicly said, you know, he would abolish.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I don't know, just fucking when people tell you who they are, believe them. I don't understand how we lost the plot with this, but I mean, I've talked to so many people, and what I always reiterate is when someone tells you who they are, don't fucking make up excuses, especially when they're running for the highest office of the United States. You know, it's not like this is your pizza delivery guy who's telling you he's shitting the pizza. Okay, maybe then you can be like, I think you're pulling my leg, but this is the fucking president of the United States of America and his party. Um,
And the other thing I would point out is like, you know, the people who backed Putin in Russia or Hitler in Germany, they thought that those strongmen weren't their enemy. They were like, well, they're brutalizing people, they're murdering people, and they're breaking the rule of law, but it's fine because they're my guy. How did that work out for them? Do you think the Germans who supported the Nazi party were happy when they and their sons were sent off to war and were massacred by the Soviets? Or when, anyone who spoke out against the government was placed in a fucking gulag? Do you think the hardline right wing nationalists in Russia are happy now that they and their sons are being killed by the Ukrainians in a pointless war that doesn't benefit them in any way? And that, Putin's corruption has destroyed the Russian economy so that quality of life has dropped to like such an extent that it's comparable to early Soviet Union. You know what I mean? There is Strongmen are not efficient ways of running the government. They do not raise quality of life. They do not make things equal. They do not allow for social mobility. Like all of those things require egalitarian, fair societies. And to gain the power that they gain, strongmen break all of those systems. They rigidify society in place for themselves and they leave everyone else at the bottom.
yeah, so just some food for thought. Like actions have consequences. Um, so like, fuck, I don't know. Do you want to? What else do you got, Fowler? Hit me with your best shot. Let's. What do you want to talk about? Because I'm getting. If I get any more heated, I'll turn into the Human Torch from fucking Fantastic Four.
People should pressure Republicans. People should, if you have Republican congressmen or senators or governors, you should write them and say, Putin is a murderer. Putin is a terrorist. Are you saying you back Putin?
Well, have you
I
seen what
think
the?
the
Have you seen?
Democratic Party needs to seize Navalny's death, and I think they have been doing this. I'm very glad that they're doing this. Navalny's death should be constantly put everywhere. Navalny's death should be linked to all the other people that Putin has killed inside and outside of the war, and this should be a rallying cry to Americans. So I think the Israel-Gaza war has really distracted us from all the suffering, death, and misery that's happening in Ukraine. And we need to continue funding Ukraine, and we need to continue supporting democracy, and we need to continue fighting these authoritarian that have come to power in the early 2010s, like Trump, and who are attempting to bring this world back to a much more dark and medieval time period that we escaped from.
Yeah, well, and just to put the cherry on top of that, I mean, going back to what I said earlier about us having an obligation, like, we did not cement our power as a world superpower because we sat in the shadows and did nothing. Our global force, our quality of life, our the development of um, our economy, all these different things that we take for granted nowadays. That did not come because we cowered in the shadows. That came because we exerted our global power. That came because we got involved in geopolitical conflicts that in the long run benefited us. And I think, if Russia does fall, if Russia is not able to exert its influence beyond um, its current borders, I mean, there's going to be a huge benefit. The Ukrainian people and also the other former Soviet powers that are terrified because they know they're next. Um, they're not going to forget about it, and there is a huge benefit to us that if Russia is not allowed to take its former territories back, that we will be rewarded. We will be rewarded for the actions that we take in Ukraine and abroad. In the same way we were rewarded after World War II with the America being the superpower of the world.
The other thing to think about is when Trump trashes NATO and he says that he would let the Russians attack them. The last time NATO assembled was not because we were supporting a member of NATO in Europe. The last time NATO assembled to work together was after 9/11. So the NATO alliance benefits us just as much as it benefits everyone else. Without NATO, without these alliances, we would have to fight the entire world by ourselves. And how is that working for China?
Yeah,
how
well, and
how
how
did
is
that
that
work for Nazi Germany?
how is that working for us when our military is basically saying there's a recruitment crisis because too many people are on Adderall and fucking morbidly obese? How's that going to work out? Like, no offense, but your cousin Tim with the AR-15 is not going to be able to fight off the fucking Russian military.
This is a really difficult situation politically because
Yeah, it's an optics nightmare
um,
for a politician.
it's an optical nightmare, and also the funding for Ukraine. The legislature are tying it to the war in Gaza, which Arda and I have both talked about is a genocide, and this is a blatant hostage crisis. The pro-Israel faction of our government knows that the war is unpopular, knows that Netanyahu is killing women and children, knows that he's committing a genocide, but they are using the fact that if there's reporting that the Ukrainians need Europe and the United States to fund them. They will fall to the Russians if we don't keep supporting them, and they are using, you know, a they are threatening to allow the Russians to theoretically take over Europe, to take Ukraine and keep going if we don't keep funding the genocide. And that is some vicious psychotic bullshit. It's monstrous, but I think it's a really difficult conversation to have because, and I know there are some people like Bernie Sanders has been very aggressive about saying that the cost is too great and he will not fund the bill if it's fused to the Israel aid. But I don't know. It's a difficult situation in my mind because I think it's really important we support other democracies. Regardless of whether they work with us or not. I think it was really good that Biden supported Lula, and despite Lula being incredibly antagonistic to America, because if we believe in democracy, that includes them electing people that we
Yeah.
that we
Well,
would
it's
like.
it's it's shedding kind of our more it's shedding the what I call the great hypocrisy of America, which has been that we constantly talk about democracy and constantly talk about rule of law and allowing the people, this populist notion, this Jeffersonian notion of the people, um, to elect leaders, but we don't respect it when those leaders do not align with our self-interest. Um, and I think Biden supporting Lula was a really good step to mend that because that is the major critique that other geopolitical powers have of America, is that we're very selective about the type of democracy we prefer. We will fund dictators and fund the most despotic, evil, disgusting human beings if it means that um, business interests, particularly of the oil barons and the corporations that control natural resources, if they're enriched. Um, True respect and truly abiding by the principles of democracy means that you know people in other countries are going to elect people that maybe have certain tendencies that we don't prefer. I mean, as long as they're not genocidal, evil, maniacal, anti-democratic tendencies, you know, or those tendencies are not harmful to um, groups of people within the country, then we have that is what respect is. That is what mutual respect and mutual cooperation looks like. It's respecting other countries and their right to participate in the democratic process, in the same way that in the United States, and Donald Trump has shown this. People win that people don't like. I certainly was not happy in 2016 when Trump won, but I didn't go around saying the election was stolen, because everybody respected, the parties, the politicians respected at that time. They don't anymore. The process of democracy, which means that sometimes people you don't like are going to win.
We also just can't brutalize them forever. I mean, this is what caused the rise of Nazi Germany,
This is what, by the
the
way, this our
shooting inside. I
brutalization.
mean, we can't just oppress the South Americans and kill every single one of
Yes,
their charismatic pro democracy leaders.
let
Like
me
at
let
some
me let me
point,
add.
they will rise up.
Yeah, let me add too. This migration crisis that's happening is the result of that. Much of it is the result of us not respecting the people of South America's right to democratically elect their own leaders. So, if you care about the border, you should care about democracy in South America. Uh,
I also don't think it's like people talk about how South America has a history of authoritarianism, but that is the natural reaction of us every time they have a democracy, killing their leaders and destroying their democracy. Like, of course, if every time the people try and democratically elect leaders, we murder them all, of course they're going to be increasingly authoritarian and increasingly rely on strongmen to
and
survive.
increasingly rely on our enemies such as Russia and China. I think Cuba is a great example of this. We have refused to reopen negotiations with Cuba, and they've had to lean on China and lean on Russia for support, because those are
Mm.
the only two countries that seem to want to interact with them. I mean, we place an embargo on Cuba, and that embargo extends to other nations trading with them. It's not just America; it's other countries, um, who are our allies that we have dissuaded from engaging in diplomatic relations with Cuba, and that has led to them having to lean on countries like Russia and China, um, for economic support.
Yeah, foreign policy is not the part of um, politics that matters to the average American, and um, I think this has really hurt us morally and spiritually in the past. I mean, you know, Americans did not want to go into World War II. We understood that, like, our allies, including the French, who, you know, without the French, we would have lost the Revolutionary War. We would not exist as a country. The French have always helped us throughout early American history. Even those allies that we owe everything to for our autonomy and for our democracy. Many Americans wanted to abandon them and allow the Nazis to take them over and, let's be honest, genocide them, ethnically cleanse them. And, many Americans were against the war, even when we knew the Holocaust was happening. And even, many Americans wanted to reject those Holocaust survivors, those Jews who tried to escape Europe after, their family and their children were just, and their friends and their neighbors were just killed. And I think there's an American tendency, because we are so isolated from the rest of Europe and the world, to just have this, we're the best, fuck the rest mentality. But, like, those actions have consequences. And when you think about who you vote for and you think about how you use power, you have to think also about how we affect the world outside of America as well. Because we do have a disproportionate amount of influence and power. We can completely billions of people. Whether Biden continues funding the Ukrainians or whether Trump is elected and he not only allows the Russians to take most of Eastern Europe back, but potentially allows them to attack our NATO allies. I mean, that will change the face of Europe for hundreds of years. And you can't forget that responsibility. It's
Yeah.
irresponsible for you not to think
Yeah,
about it.
well, we this is not the 1700s. The era of isolationism is dead. I mean, I think a lot of people cling to it because they want it, but I'm sorry. We live in a connected, interconnected world, and that's just the way it is. So when you think about politics, you have to think about things outside the United States. Because guess what? There's such a lack of education, and I'm not calling people stupid, but there is just such a superb lack of education about how interconnected we are. I mean, like I'm a big supporter of the agricultural industry, and I'm a big supporter of the American agricultural industry because so much of our food is outsourced. So much of our food is outsourced from, um, or is it insourced? I don't remember the word, but so much of our food is imported from outside the United States. I mean, I could go right now to the farmers market down the road and get all sorts of fruits and vegetables, all sorts of things from outside the United States. That is a consequence of globalism, and that is a consequence of our modern economic system allowing us to be interconnected with various sectors in various different countries. And I guarantee you, if you were to take that away, people would be enraged. People would be mad about, oh, why can't I get pineapples in the winter? Why can't I get this shit in the winter? Well, you shit the bed by ignoring, geopolitics and allowing, say, the country that produces pineapples to be invaded by their neighbor. Um, what I'm trying to say is there are consequences. There are consequences to ignoring the global problem and ignoring the global stage. And those consequences they are immediate. They are you will see them when they happen. And I mean, if we want to return back to the isolationist, nativist state, that we were in the 1700s, by all means, let's do that. But just know the Fashion Nova pants that you ordered, the shit you ordered off Amazon that's coming from Bangladesh, you ain't getting that shit. And, I don't want to hear crying, when you're reaping what you sow. But very much like the migrant crisis right now. That's how I feel about, in a way, that's how part of me feels about the situation at the border. We're reaping what we sowed because we fucked around with our geopolitics in South America for decades. And now we're suffering the consequences of that. And, you know, it is what it is. Um,
I'm hoping the progressives and the remaining sane Republicans will split the Ukraine aid and the border aid and the Israel aid, but I don't know. It may be a thing where our politicians do have to pick, like, is protecting NATO and Europe and European democracy from the Russians, like, is that more or less important than stopping the genocide happening in Israel? And is that more or less important than the fact that if a lot of the more draconian policies the Republicans want at the border are pushed in, many people in on the border, refugees who are women and children, will die as they have been dying under Abbott's tenure, and that's the psychotic choice that the pro-Israel, pro-border people are really making.
yeah, it's a shit sandwich, and I'm sure we've been in this situation before historically, where, but this, I mean, this is whatever historical uh parallel I can draw, because I'm sure there is one. I'm sure there was vicious deliberation about various bills that were not televised and not publicized that we could find that matched this situation. But this is our moment.
I
This is
will
our
say, I think
generation's,
one,
historical parallel.
definitely, I will say that I think a positive thing about our era is, like, Vietnam had this problem too. Like, before Vietnam, before we televised war, I mean, Americans really just didn't understand what it meant to go to war. I guess we did with the Civil War, but, like, with those European wars, I mean, you maybe heard letters from your son and you saw the marching bands and you heard the reports. But when Americans funded these wars, when Americans sent their children to die in these wars, they didn't really understand the
They
implications of
didn't have
it. And
homeboys on
I
GoPros
think
out in the
many,
woods.
yeah, and I think one of the positives in a fucked up way of the internet is, if you support the Israel war, you know exactly what the Israelis are doing. You know the cost of your policies. And I would say this is also true with the war in Ukraine. Like, Arda and I support the Ukrainians, but
Yeah, you
like,
can go right now and watch
I'm
like
under.
hours of body cam footage of just Ukrainian soldiers in Russia, in Ukraine, just getting fucking pounded, shot at, fucking blown up by tanks. It's all out there. You can go watch it if you really want to see the consequences of supporting Vladimir Putin. It is completely available. Uh, the fucking first like
Yeah,
3 weeks of the war in Ukraine was like a TikTok special. Like fucking, you could just go on TikTok and be like, "Oh, here comes the jet." Like it was not. Nothing was hidden from the world.
and I think this might be good in a sense for voters, because I think it makes it so that we know what we're buying of our votes.
Yeah, exactly. But I think we need to wrap it up. We're hitting an hour, so I think we've talked about all we need to talk.
We've been doing a lot of long ones last couple times, right? It's been the
Hell
last
yeah.
three have been an hour.
Well, it's shit. It got really real, really fast over the past 3 weeks, so that's probably a lot of things occurred very back to back.
Hmm.
So we didn't even talk about Fannie Willis.
Yeah, I don't think there's that much to talk about. We'll talk about it next week.
Yeah, we'll talk
I
about.
will say, like, if it turns out that Jack Smith is like, I don't know, he's like a secret pedophile, or he's like, he's doing heroin, like he seems to be the only DA who's prosecuting Trump, who does seem to understand that, the nation is watching him and it is the most important thing he will do across his entire life, and is treating it with the level of deference and professionalism and competence that, really should be the bare minimum for
Yeah,
for them.
yeah,
So I'm just every night I go to bed and I pray to God that Jack Smith is not fucking up in some way that we just haven't detected yet.
yeah. We can detect it afterwards. Like he can fuck up, but we can't know about it until after this shit blows over.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, there's a lot there, but we'll talk about that next podcast. So, anything else you got to say, Fowler? I'm about to sign out because I ain't got nothing else to say.
No, I think we covered it.
All right, well, you guys, you beautiful audience members who stuck with us for 52 minutes and 53 seconds, thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see y'all in the next video.